Hi, I'm Moshe, and I'm autistic.
I'm Leah, and I'm boring. Welcome to the Now You Know One Autistic podcast.
The opinions expressed in this podcast reflect one autistic and one Leah, and don't necessarily reflect the entire autistic community.
Let's get to it.
Hi, Leah.
Hi, Moshe.
How are you doing today?
Exhausted.
Yeah, me too. This is our first episode back from the Hagim. I know we were planning to do an episode last week and yesterday and the day before, so things kind of got away from us. It is we call it the Hagim, the Jewish holiday, the high holiday season here in Israel and around the world in Jewish communities. This is a podcast about autism and neurodiversity and not Judaism, so we won't get too much into it. But on that topic, we're very excited today, as promised in some of the posts last week, that we have Rabbi Simcha Weinstein with us today with the Jewish Autism Network. Rabbi Simcha, hi.
How are you? I'm also a mid-high holiday marathon, so I get the exhaustion.
Absolutely. I'm the cook, so this is like my Olympics.
Yeah, you said it was like your Olympics.
Yeah.
So we're very, very excited to have you on today. It's been a long time coming. We've been talking for quite a while, and we're going to do it. This is going to be the first of a 2-episode series with Rabbi Simcha, and we're going to be talking today and then the next episode, which hopefully will be sooner than this one was. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be talking about advocacy, ableism, and identity in the autistic community, the Jewish autistic community, and we're going to discuss a whole series of topics in regards to advocacy, ableism, and identity. So, Rabbi Simcha, why don't we start? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the Jewish Autism Network, and what brought you to advocating for that.
Yeah. Firstly, thank you for having me on, and it's really a pleasure. And when we spoke on the phone, I remember saying, like, let's just pause it. This should be the episode. Like, I felt like we all hit it off right away. So I think this is going to be a fun conversation. So the Jewish Autism Network is evolving, but so I'm running the Jewish Autism Network, and I don't even know what it is. So it's an evolution, not a revolution, but I guess I could talk about what led me, and I felt like it's been a sort of really a journey of a lifetime that sort of led me to launch the Jewish Autism Network. But I don't know how far back into my origins you'd like me to go. I am sort of a colorful personality, but I guess I like to joke that I didn't grow up, I am a rabbi, but I like to joke that I did not grow up religious or observant. I grew up normal. I'm from a secular British family in the north of England. And growing up, for me, I think I was like a very shy child, and I was sort of the beginning of high school. I was bullied a little bit, and I always saw solace in superheroes. I've been a bit of a culture vulture my whole life, and I did harbor dreams of working in the film industry, which I did start, and I went to film school, and then they say man plans and God laughs. I think that's the phrase. So I did end up taking a bit of a detour into yeshiva. I got involved more Jewishly in college, and that led me to yeshiva. That led me to the rabbinical school. That led me to becoming an assistant rabbi in Brooklyn Heights. That led me to becoming an art school rabbi in Pratt Institute, which really, for me, felt very almost like coming home, because I was an art school student, and now suddenly I'm an art school rabbi. So I could talk about the Talmud, or I could talk about, Evil Dead 2. Both cultural touchstones are there. In fact, sometimes the film history, is more readily available than the Talmudics. And I started to also, with the students, really create literature and artwork that dealt with the synthesis of theology and popular culture. I read a book about superheroes, which I think, maybe was a bit of a lightning in a bottle, because it doesn't always go that way. I've written other books that no one knows about, including my own family, even though the books are dedicated to them. But I wrote this book about superheroes that to this day has traction. I think maybe it was a timing thing. And if we get into autism, it's sort of interesting that I didn't really even put the two together, but I've been writing about masks and sort of double identities and really like the symbolism of being an outsider, insider, and and assimilated archetypes and things that I've been writing about for a very long time. It was only like years later that a self-advocate sort of said, maybe there's a connection. I'm like, wow, yeah, that's interesting. I guess what led me into advocacy. Am I talking too much?
I was actually going to get word in edgewise, not because you're talking too much. I love everything you're saying, but I kind of want to respond to a few things before I forget, because I have a memory thing where I don't remember everything. And I wanted to say, first of all, Moshe and I have both said the same thing that you said, which is sometimes we'll just go out for coffee and we'll have such a great conversation that we think we should have microphones with us all the time. Because I think people like us just have this tendency to verbalize everything internally and make everything important, and it makes it important to other people. I also just really love that superhero connection for you, because what did we always say about you, Michael?
What did we always say about me?
That you're a superhero.
I am a superhero.
You save people. So that's kind of his autism superpower. He, somebody needs help, he's there. Somebody needs to do something, he's there. Somebody needs to carry 400 heavy bags, he carries them. Like, he's a superhero. So the connection there is really interesting for me.
Yeah.
Could talk about that a little bit maybe. And I just love that you come from multiple backgrounds. You must be able to reach out to so many more people. You must have the ability to be applicable to so many more people than your average rabbi, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting in my kind of evolution, that there was a time when, if we're getting into sort of like the masking side, and I don't want to make this episode about me, because but like Moshe, I don't want to make it about me. What do you think about me? That was a joke, by the way. So, no, but I think that when I first became sort of more quote unquote religious, and I did grow up pretty traditional, England is a little more traditional, I guess, in its sort of Jewish communal life. But
I mean, where we grew up too, Canada is the same. There are some very religious people, but there's also, the Reform and the Reconstructionist and all the other options there too, which aren't necessarily
traditional. I guess we just called it shul. I didn't know it was an Orthodox shul. It was just shul. And we did go Shabbos morning, and then we'd come home, jump in the car, and go and watch the football game. And we always had to bend down when driving past the rabbi as a sign of respect. Almost crushed into the rabbi, but we did bend down, so out of respect. But I would say that there was a time when I first entered sort of yeshiva. I look at it like kind of Noah's Ark kind of comparison. That I really felt that I had to kind of like almost remove myself from secularism, and I kind of this is back in the day of CDs, so I got rid of all my Oasis and Beatles, and I stopped going to cinema, and I really felt that I had to kind of remove myself and kind of enter the word. And I was very devout. Not that I'm not devout, but I think that maybe I kind of needed that rigidness. And as I kind of get older, I've realized that these, experiences that I've had, and this, I really do love culture, and this, it's kind of like my, in many ways, it's sort of like, the superheroes kind of like, have been my own sort of heroes and my own guides. And I didn't even realize there was a whole Jewish connection to the superheroes. I felt it was crypto Jewish, but that was something that in college I kind of discovered as a way to connect with students. So really, I think that you're right. That kind of like, for me, it's kind of having like, being like a bit of an outsider, insider I always worried that was something I should be embarrassed of and maybe, but I've embraced it. Yeah.
I think honestly, Rabbi, that's amazing because you can reach out to people who would never speak to, let's say, a Frum rabbi who was born Frum, or, you can identify. And coming around to that, we do have a lot of listeners that are not Jewish and don't know much about Judaism. So let's touch just real quickly on tshuva and Bal Tshuva and what that means. That means you're a Jew who's not necessarily religious and you become very religious. And what you described was also Moshe's experience. He became very rigid. He wore the black hat. He stopped listening to secular music. And eventually he had to scale back into a point where he was comfortable. Whereas me, I always kind of was comfortable with Judaism, wherever I could just pick up a siddur and be more religious or not.
My grandparents were members of a conservative synagogue in Montreal. And I would go unwillingly. I went to Hebrew school up until grade 9, from kindergarten up to grade 9. I was at one point fluent in Hebrew and Yiddish. I could communicate with my grandparents, their first language was Yiddish, the language of the Ashkenazi Jews. And after my bar mitzvah, is what happens to a lot of people, I kind of fell away from it when I no longer had to do it anymore. And I went through a long period of time where I was secular, but I felt an attachment to return. So I returned, and as it happens in many of these, less than Jewish communities, the only presence was the Chabad. And I went to their synagogues there, and I tried to figure out where I stood. And it seemed the most convenient place to be like, I'll just be like you. And they said, you don't have to, that's fine. You don't have to do it. You can just be like you. And as Leah said, I went through the period where I was the black hat as close as possible that I could to that sort of way of thinking and way of doing. And I really tried. I really did. But it caused a lot of conflict, because as an autistic person, I believe very strongly in rules. And if you follow certain rules, those are the rules that you follow. And any deviation from that causes a great deal of anxiety for me. So I realized that I could not operate in a way that I could not maintain. And then when we came to Israel, we realized that the people that cling most, let me try this again, the people that cling the closest to everything that they can are either people that were brought up in it or people that are trying to prove something.
People who are looking for themselves. And I think the process of becoming more religious is a very good way of searching for and looking for yourself, but you have to find balance. So I find that your experience, interestingly enough, sort of mirrors Moshe's experience also. And
I consider myself to be Orthodox Jewish. I'm very religious. I wear the tzitzim and the kippah and all that stuff, but I also wear jeans. And, I don't wear the hat anymore.
We listen to rock music.
We watch like horror movies. We do engage in a lot of secular things. And then, Yom Kippur, I spend 12 hours in synagogue, doing tshuva and praying and all that stuff. So I found a balance in my life. But when we came to Israel, we realized it was a lot easier, because you don't have to try in Israel to be Jewish. It's the default. All the food, for the most part, is kosher. The holidays are observed statewide, instead of where it used to be in North America, where on Shabbat, I still had people calling me. And if the rent was due, it was due. And I was like, I can't. It's Yom Kippur. And they're like, well, I don't know what that is, but you still have to be aware of that. And I currently work for a Frum company here in Israel. And we keep the holidays. We have discussions all the time about the halacha of what we're doing. We're talking a lot about, the mechanics of it. And over lunch break, we chat about, what we did over Shabbos. So it's a great life that I just didn't have in North America. And I love Israel. I think it's a wonderful country. But it taught me a valuable lesson, which is that you don't necessarily have to be as strict as some of the Haredi people are in order to be a proud Jewish person. You can be a secular person who doesn't keep Shabbat and doesn't eat kosher and still be a proud Jew. Like it's your own journey. And my path back to my faith took me to a place where at one point, as Leah will attest, I was the guy with the ripped jeans and the tzitzim. So I was sort of a man who stood out of context for what I was perceived as. And it makes me really happy to meet someone else whose journey was very much the same.
Well,
yeah, a lot of that resonates. Yeah, it's not all or nothing. And I have found that in my own journey that, being kind of like this outsider insider does make me more approachable. It's also put me into all sorts of interesting networks where I guess a traditional rabbi doesn't get to go. Like who gets to present at a panel at Comic-Con. And that's kind of, opened all sorts of doors. So yeah.
what's the name of your superhero book? Because you mentioned it, but you didn't mention the name.
The book is called Up, and Oive.
Oh, I'm going to read it. We're going to buy it. Up and Oive. Absolutely. So anyway, I would like to gear us back towards the topic of our podcast because, again, I do like explaining for people because we have a lot of listeners who aren't Jewish and they might want to know like what this Israel thing is and what all this Jewish stuff is. But they come to listen to us for the neurodivergency. So how did neurodivergency come into your life? What did you realize about it? And what made you
start the Jewish
Autism Network?
So it's like anything. It's sort of an evolution. And that's where I think that my kind of like also I would call it an awakening around ableism has also been an evolution. You don't know what you don't know. And for me, it was sort of like, I have 4 children and my second oldest was not hitting milestones. And I think I was very much, and I'm going to talk about my kind of, I guess it's a journey into ableism. So, if I trigger anyone, it's kind of intentional. So but I'll just kind of go through it the way that I experienced it. But I was very much kind of a dad in denial.
You're in the right podcast, first of all. We say the controversial things that nobody wants
to say. I'm sorry. My phone just went off. Okay?
Yeah, we can still hear you. But as I was saying, we're all
kind of like that dad in denial. Don't want to talk about it. The doctors don't know what they're talking about, and he'll grow out of it. That was sort of like my perspective. I still think the doctors don't know what they're talking about, but that's a whole other, topic. And they talk about, I guess, in advocacy about, providers and agencies being family driven. Well, I was like literally sort of the Uber driver. That was about the extent of my kind of involvement in the journey. And I think, denial, it works until it doesn't. And I think that, the brain, in terms of the stages of acceptance, the brain protects itself from things that are, uncomfortable and even painful. So I think that was kind of like the way I dealt with things. And it was sort of a journey and talk about sort of, fitting in and religiosity. I felt that, our second oldest had to be, in a certain school system because that's what was expected. And it was very, for me, difficult and sort of heartbreaking when I realized that he was not going to be in that system, which is sort of like, was also part of the journey of sort of, towards acceptancy. But in terms of my entry point into advocacy, and I'm well aware that it's not, I'm talking, sort of about my son, not on behalf of my son. So I'm very careful not to, appropriate, his journey. And I don't want to, what's the word? Like, appropriate him and his story. But I felt that we went through some inequities that for me were so shocking that I sort of had to talk about it. I felt like it was, I felt that this was, it was almost like they say in rabbinics, like a shlichus, like a mission. That it was really, for us, it was sort of around puberty, everything seemed to change in a nanosecond. And, around puberty, there were more behaviors And that those behaviors, I think, were kind of expressing themselves. And I have the language now that I didn't even sort of understand at the time, were expressing themselves more through the lens of mental health. And that's something that I'm really kind of passionate about, is comorbidity within neurodivergence and within autism and within like the kind of the developmental disability population, because our systems, I can talk about it from a New York State perspective. I don't know other, states and countries, but we don't seem to offer in New York State whole person care. So you either fit into, and I didn't even know about these systems at the time. I didn't know. They were just acronyms that sounded something like out of Star Trek. So, we did have an educational advocate that helped us with schooling, and this advocate has become, I think I speak to her over the years more than my own mother. She's become like a real kind of mentor to me. Shout out to Joan Harrington, still crushing it at age, I don't know how old Joan is, but Joan is like eternal in advocacy, and like all like all ADHDers, I kind of feel like I'm going on the tangent over here, but I'll try and, Leah, you got to keep me stay on target, like from Star Wars.
I had something to say. So not just comorbidity, but also misdiagnosis. So a lot of times neurodivergency is misdiagnosed as mental health issue. And again, you're on the right podcast, because we say the things that no one else is saying and that are very, very controversial. So go for it. Say whatever.
Okay, good. So,
but what I'm interested in really, and the thing that interested me about talking to you when we did the pre-show was the internalized, the internalized feeling of ableism that happens within people. And also that whole moment, because we've all had it. Our son was kind of like the sacrificial lamb, if you want to say, because at 4.5, he was diagnosed. And then all the adults look at each other and go, where did he get it from? Is it me? Is it you? Mm. What's going on? So talk a little bit about that process, maybe.
Okay. But I just want to like put a ribbon on the entry to advocacy, which was really like, puberty. I'd say things got real quick. And suddenly the school are telling me I have to be, I think it was like 15 minutes away at all times. So it's very hard to do anything when you have to be 15 minutes away from the school at all times. And then, there were meltdowns that landed us into psychiatric settings. And what really got me, my entry to advocacy was just seeing how many kids like Ellie were in these settings and facilities, and how unequipped these settings and facilities were for a young adult on the spectrum. And when the very doctor who is like, the clinician who's prescribing the medication, and quite a lot of the medication at that point, is telling me I don't know anything about autism, I'm like thinking to myself, something's not right over here, because he was on a unit that was not in any way adapted for his needs, sensory, whether it's sensory, whether it's just in terms of communication, which is like obviously key, as I've learned. And that was the point where I sort of started to kind of speak up and speak out. And I didn't realize siloed systems, case management, the failure to kind of understand a dual diagnosis, whole person care, because, who doesn't have anxiety, especially in 2024? So, and I sort of came to kind of understand that the comorbidities around autism and neurodivergence, and that was my kind of entry into advocacy, was really seeing just how unequipped. And what shocked me was that it was the moment that we needed help the most that there was the least. And I sort of was blessed. I was blessed to be in a community that seems to have, we have more services than Starbucks. And, when he was younger, we're in like the Disney world of inclusion, and there were all these organizations and everyone's sending me a gift packet and all these. But when I really needed it, And that's not necessarily critique on the community, because if New York State couldn't figure it out, how could, any one communal organization, though they were claiming to have figured it out? So that I found frustrating.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you're saying all of this, and I'm really glad that you advocated for your son, because again, I'm sure you're busy and you probably haven't listened to every episode. But on previous episodes, we've also touched on the fact that Moshe's still on a medication that his body is addicted to that he never needed because his parents didn't understand what his meltdowns were.
Yeah. As we sort of went into, I think in our first or maybe our second episode, when I was first coming out, it was also around the puberty thing, I think, that I was especially, as they called it, difficult. And a lot of, there wasn't a formal diagnosis of autism as we know it today. Back then, there was autism, but it was certainly not the way that it's presented. There was
Yeah, the problem with that is that autism in and of itself, what the process does to your brain, the type of person you are, hasn't changed. It's the diagnostic criteria that have changed.
Right. And they had Asperger's and a bunch of other things.
Right.
So when I was first exhibiting some of the harsher symptoms, and one of the ones that really sort of brought me into therapy was the fact that I was having meltdowns at school. I went to a school that was built for 2,000 and had a student population of 5,000. It was overcrowded, overpopulated, and crowds would be coming at me, and there would be noise and sounds and sights, and it was very overwhelming. And I would end up running to a quiet room and just trying to find a way to calm down. And that happened enough times that my family at the time decided that I needed to go to therapy. And I met with a psychiatrist, and they diagnosed me with anxiety and depression and a slew of other things. And they put me on antidepressants, and they put me on antipsychotics, and they put me on anti-anxiety. I went on medication to help me sleep, medications to help me get up. And to this day, I'm on an antidepressant that I certainly don't think I actually ever needed, but it was given to me because essentially nobody wanted to take the time to figure out what was going wrong. So they wanted to make me manageable. So they would give me medications so that I could go to school and I could behave myself. And it was a really sad depiction of the fact that people, not just for myself, but we've heard from other listeners of our podcast who are also adult diagnosed. And they were told that as children, they were basically told that they were difficult, impossible, broken, abnormal, weird, awkward, you name it. And they were exposed to neglect and abuse and essentially being shut down. And they talk a lot about the infamous I Am Autism commercial that was put out by
I've seen it.
The one that we probably shouldn't say, but everyone.
I'm not going to name them, but everyone knows who they are. And it essentially depicted autism as something that destroys families, steals lives, like this criminal that lives in your house and robs from you. And that's actually how it was treated when I was a child. It was treated like you need to not. And our son now was diagnosed from a very young age, and he has received some, but not by any means all, of the therapies and supports that he needs to be functional. Whereas in my day, when I was dysfunctional, I would be hit both at school and at home, and I would be yelled at, and I would be told just to sit down and keep quiet. And that is the basis of one of the reasons why we do the podcast, is because there are a lot of adult diagnosed autistics out there, people with autism, people with ADHD, people with any number of neurodiversity related, conditions. And they all have the same story. When they were a child, they were basically treated like they were mentally ill, when all they really needed was a way to understand the world and how they relate to it.
I just thought you cried a lot, and I enjoyed hugging you.
Leia was the only person, we've known each other since we were 7, and Leia was the only person who actually never treated me like I was just an inconvenience.
I just thought you cried a lot, and I thought that was fine. I was like, why are you so sad?
And it was a very tragic way of growing up. But advocacy and ableism have come in leaps and bounds over the years. And I'm really glad that we live in an era now, which by no means is perfect, but where a child who is diagnosed as autistic is actually given some of the supports, depending on where you live, of course.
So speaking of advocacy and ableism,
Right.
we're going to dive immediately into it next time, and we'll take a much deeper dive next time. It does turn out that this time was just an introduction to ableism, which was well worth it. There
is a lot that Boshi just said that I just want to respond a little bit to. And I think this two-parter is going to become a 10-parter because there's so much. There's so much. And you had just said something that kind of almost, it gave me a recall of a memory that when I was in school, I really wanted to be a good student. I wanted to I kind of like to learn. And I was sort of a bit of the class clown, and I think masked my anxiety very well, still do it very well. And I remember you reminded me that there were times I would go behind the stage of the school. I'd find a desk literally behind the curtain and sit there and do my work because I just really wanted to do the work, but it was just hard for me to focus in the classroom. But yeah, no, I do have to kind of be on a part of my many roles is today I train peer family advocates. So I believe it's called family peer advocates. I always get it wrong. And it's something that I absolutely love to do. So we have a coaching call in 12 minutes. But I just want to kind of for part one, just to kind of put a little bit of a ribbon onto it. And in terms of the mental health piece, yeah, no, for me, it's sort of I think that I'm not sure what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but have, neurodivergence and anxiety seems to go hand in hand. Maybe it's the, we're operating in a world that's not designed for us, which brings out the anxiety, or there's kind of the internal anxiety, but the problem is that there's no real evidence-based treatments to treat that anxiety in a way that is competent to the operating system with which it's trying to focus on. So you're going to get treatment that's based on a profile that's not yours, which is very damaging and dangerous. And I think often done with the best of intentions. And then if I was being cynical, I'd talk about, big pharma and who's, follow the money. That's a whole other part of advocacy that I've kind of realized. Follow the money. I've seen how this, it's very fascinating to see elected officials, how decisions are made. That's a whole other, but to put a ribbon on terms of my kind of evolution, that I felt that I had to do something. I didn't know what to do. And I started to kind of do a little bit of research from the parent piece. And this was before I even kind of was aware of my own neurodivergence, which may be a part two, but I want to leave it on a bit of a cliffhanger that for me, I felt I'm going to become one of these mother warriors. I was seeing on, and I know that's a massive trigger, and I'm saying it's intentionally. I'm saying that because it's been an evolution. And I thought, I'm going to be like warrior dad. And I'll, I don't know, I'll start what's the word? Videoing the journey, as it were. And I kind of thought that, and I've since kind of found that that's a little bit icky, not my comfort level. And I certainly did not ever go around with a GoPro camera following my kid around because that's weird. But I didn't know. I knew I had to do something. I didn't know what and why and how. And that is itself evolving. And I think in terms of my own discovery and in terms of my interactions with self-advocates and parent advocates, that's really kind of changed me. So I guess like for part one, I just knew that I felt that I compelled to kind of be involved. I felt this was becoming a calling, and I didn't quite know how that was going to kind of manifest. And that was kind of the genesis of me kind of going into advocacy, which is a whole journey into itself. But that's my part one.
Well, by Simcha, what a pleasure. You're a very smart person. I'm sure I'm not the first person to point that out to you.
You actually may be the first person that ever said that to me. Number one. Number two, as you described yourself as the cook, and I know you're a lot more than the cook, you only have about another, I think it's 3-6, you got about another 12 meals left of the high holidays. So, yeah.
Pray for me, even though I'm the one who's here at the wall. Anyway.
I'm going to pray for you. And we're to be continued. So I'm jumping off.
Rabbi Simcha, as they say, I'll leave you to your meeting. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that's the end of our episode, and now you know one autistic just a little bit better. Now, something you may not know about some autistics is that we often struggle with ending social interactions. So, Leah?
It's okay, Moshe. I'll take care of it. Thank you for listening to Now You Know One Autistic. See you next week.